Is this your Christmas getup? You just go full sweats and pajamas or what?
Yeah, for the most part. This is pretty much like from I guess from here to like probably Jan 1st. Because Jan 2nd is when things get insane. But yeah, from here to Jan 1st, I'm gonna enjoy the calm before the portal craziness.
Yeah.
So speaking of January 2nd, so obviously it's the day the portal officially opens. Seems like it's, the doors cracked at least a little bit for the last couple weeks here. But at like, what does that day look like for you, or what do you anticipate that day looking like for you? Because it sort of seems like it's going to be like NBA free agency style, where like 12:01 a.m. we've got signings happening right off the bat.
Yeah, so I'm curious to see how many of these guys ultimately take visits before they make decisions. And so that's why I wonder if we're going to see this rush to decisions, or we're going to see at least, everyone kind of knows what's happening, but it's just going to be that first weekend they make that visit and then they make the commitment or whatever. So, I'm actually curious to see how many early like day of commitments. That's it. Like, I mean, come Jan 2nd, it wouldn't surprise me if you see it from us and other national outlets of like, hey, don't be surprised if this guy ends up here, like where you can formally kind of report on stuff that's been occurring behind the scenes here in the weeks leading up to Jan 2nd. A lot of it is back channeling between agents. A lot of these guys, especially at the top end, at the quarterback position, at some of these key positions, their agents are already negotiating and talking with programs and getting stuff put together. So come Jan 2nd, they have a plan, or at the very least, a short list of schools they want to choose from. And at most, it's I mean, we're already hearing some QBs already have like a decision or a destination pretty much set, like we pretty much know where like Brendan Sorsby's going,
Mhm.
and there's a few others like that.
Tim, before we talk portal quarterbacks and such, I'm curious, and like you said, portal's not officially open. We're going to get some new names in the next coming weeks, and so, but is there a maybe power position group outside of quarterbacks that are notable to you that you've seen a couple of names already enter that maybe just college football fans should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously expecting Nebraska is going to be active in the running back and the defensive line market. And I think the running back market is already a little bigger than I expected. I am kind of to the point, and this is besides the portal question. It is, related, tangentially related. I am to the point where I think if you're a top end power four team, or at least have the resources of a top end power four team like Nebraska does, you kind of don't have an excuse to trot out to not have like quality running back and wide receiver play this day and age. Like, especially right now with what the portal is going to be and what you've seen. Like, I just think you don't need like dudes, obviously. You don't need like to replace Emmett Johnson entirely. You need to add enough to replicate, or like replicate his impact and at least try to get there. But yeah, like I kind of think at this point with what the portal looks like at the running back position, with I think with some of the relationships Nebraska has with some of those portal running backs, and I fully expect Nebraska to be pretty active there, and I think they're going to come away with a good haul. Like I really think Emmett Johnson's on-field performance this year really made a big impression to a lot of running backs across the country. And I think they're only going to be more excited once they really start to dive in on Jeep Way's offensive line tape from Georgia Tech.
Speaking of offensive line and Jeep Wade, and I'll throw Lonnie Teasley in there as well. Am I being too simplistic to see those guys come to Nebraska, and then I see several guys from their former schools hop in the portal and think, yeah, Nebraska's probably got a pretty good shot at those guys?
Yeah, Nebraska definitely has a shot at some of those guys. I mean, there's some stuff to work through. I think there was one from Georgia Tech a couple weeks ago, four-star freshman who entered the portal, who I'm not expecting to stick around at the Power Four level, just because I think he's going to have to go down to JUCO, get some grades in order and things like that. So that's one I'm kind of striking off Nebraska's list. But yeah, I mean, you saw some portal entries from South Carolina. You saw kind of a big poly on the interior of Georgia Tech's line enter the portal too, and a guy with some center experience, but also gives you some good guard depth. Same with brands from South Carolina. So yeah, like it's a good group in there already. And yeah, like I mean, Lonnie Teasley's got relationships. Jeep Wade has relationships, and I would say this too. Like I would keep an eye on guys not necessarily that are from the schools they were at, but guys they maybe lost out on the first time around, or guys that South Carolina or Georgia Tech or one of the two were involved with the first time around, and maybe they didn't land them, but those guys are back in the portal.
Tim, are there any players in that same narrative that maybe Jeep Wade or the new staffers that are coming in as well lost in their recruitment battles, whether it was at Georgia Tech or wherever they're coming from, that they now have maybe a second opportunity to sway them to Nebraska because it's a bigger brand, it's a different location than where they were before?
Oh, potentially. Okay, that's something we're just gonna have to wait and see. I think honestly, more so than the portal, which we might see some of that. I think in the 27 class, this gives Lonnie Teasley in particular, I think, some new energy because he was really putting in work on the recruiting trail. And then the results just weren't there for South Carolina these last 2 years. And it's not necessarily he's dealt with some injuries. But of course, I mean, they had a lot of talent. They didn't play up to that talent. But he done a really good job on the recruiting trail. But it really felt like this year and going into this year, South Carolina lost some of that momentum. So he gets an opportunity, I think, paired up with Jeep Wade, to kind of circle back on some guys that he'd hope to have a chance on in 27. And luckily for him, it's Nebraska's already involved in some of those guys. Talking like Jordan Agbanoma, the 4-star interior lineman from Loganville Grayson, who's a monster. Albert Simeon, the number 1 interior offensive lineman, who he barely got a shot at, but Nebraska's very much in the mix there. So they're going to get another shot at him. And again, like even guys like Kennedy Brown and Mark Matthews, who Nebraska's still trying for, like there's going to have to be a relationship built there. But I mean, neither one of those coaches were able to get those guys on campus or really able to get much momentum going at Georgia Tech or South Carolina with them. Nebraska has a presence already in those two recruitments.
Speaking of the 27 class, obviously Nebraska had a decommitment from that class in the wide receiver group yesterday. How big of a shock was the Watkins decommitment there? And I mean, he kind of felt like a weird commitment in the first place, right?
Yeah, not surprised at all. I mean, I figured it was just going to be a matter of time before he just backed off because there's other schools in pursuit. He never visited Nebraska. Like, this is not I'm cutting ties with Nebraska. This is okay, I rushed into this decision. I need to take a step back and reassess some options. He's got some options closer to home. I'm curious if he makes it up to Nebraska. Nebraska has a pretty talented wide receiver board, but they did like him. There was a reason why, he felt like there was enough interest for him to make that commitment early on. I've seen some stuff out there that Nebraska didn't accept his commitment. They eventually did. They were shocked by it too. They were caught off guard when he announced, but a couple of days later, they, after sitting down with him, it was just one of those guys where he's talented enough where they were able to accept his commitment, but it was always an expectation of you have to visit before we really, really recognize this. And on top of that, like, we know you have other options. Like, feels like you kind of rushed into this. Yeah, so I'm curious how Nebraska approaches it this offseason because they have other options, and this is like one of those big body Nayland Scott type receivers that they really want to keep adding to the room, but they have other options that kind of look like him, that feel like him. And like I said, again, receiver position at this point, yeah, you want to be involved with some of these top end guys, and Nebraska absolutely is, but like there's plenty of talent in at those positions at this point.
Tim, how does Nebraska's staff balance their impact positions that they need or guys that they're targeting, like we talked about, through this year's transfer portal class that could affect or change maybe the dynamic of the 27 recruitment class? Is that a balancing act that they have to go through, or do they just focus on what they need for the next season? How does that look, and how does the coaching staff kind of attack that without upsetting the apple cart that is the 27 class?
I think for me, like, or at least my read on it is, I think right now you can't even think about 27 because you have to think about getting this team right for 26. Like, you have a pretty good 27 class, and I think at individual, like certain positions, there's going to be this kind of balance. But like, really at this point, the only position I really see it like you having to play something of a balance is with Trey. And just because that's a 27 quarterback that's coming in that, aims to compete for the job early on, but he knows what the deal is. And, I mean, I've had plenty of conversations with Trey and his family. Like, they don't really plan on transfer. They plan on giving whatever program they're at. And ideally it's Nebraska, as long as Matt Rhule and Dana Holgorsen and the staff are here. When they come to Nebraska, the plan is for them to stick around for 2 to 3 years at the very, like, they want to give the program time to develop, for him to get into the system, really dive in. And again, if it has to be something where he's competing for the job early on or sitting for the bench, he's open to it. He's not trying to rush himself on the field. There's nothing like that. But It is something that I think Nebraska is going to have to be a little wary of, because I think part of it is you can't bring a young quarterback with multiple years of eligibility into a room that has multiple other young quarterbacks with multiple years of eligibility, unless you really think that highly of that guy. So I think that's really the only position, because at this point, I mean, Nebraska doesn't have a defensive line coach or defensive line commits. You can't really think about, oh, how is this commitment going to affect like this transfer portal D line commitment going to affect my chances at this 27 D lineman? You can't think that way. That Nebraska can't afford to think that way. I think the same thing goes at linebacker. Same thing goes at running back, even with the class they brought in here in 26 and the class they're putting together in 27. You need talent in the room, and I think everyone understands. Amir Brown understands he's going to join a competitive room. The guys Nebraska's recruiting at 27 know they're going to be joining a competitive running back room. So I wouldn't anticipate a whole lot there. I will say, though, in the 26 class, Nebraska's still after Dylan Berriman, the 4-star defensive lineman out of Monroe Parish down in Louisiana. Ushita Parish down in Louisiana, and that's a guy where I think if Nebraska has an idea of what his decision is going to be, or Nebraska lands that commitment pretty early on in the dead period, that would impact, I think, how many defensive linemen they add, because Berriman's the kind of like instant impact freshman D lineman that at the very least can play a rotational role year one, where Nebraska can, maybe add 2 D linemen instead of going for 3 and 1 depth piece that they aren't 100% sure on the value on, when you can just get the high school guy with 5 years of eligibility and, kind of a pretty high floor and a high mortar coming in.
Tim, speaking of value, have you kind of allowed yourself, I'm not asking for intel or anything here, but just in your like kind of talent eval, have you started to figure out quarterback wise where you think good value might be for Nebraska?
Yeah, I'm still figuring it out. I think just based on how these names, more names continue to enter, we're still waiting on a few. Where I'm at on the market, I think this year, Oregon, Miami, Indiana, and Tech, and we kind of know where Tech's headed. But those 4 teams are going to dictate the market. How those 4, I mean, there's they like the dominoes from who they choose as their next quarterback is going to have an impact, trickle down kind of down the line. But that said, right behind, I think those 4 schools is like Nebraska in the QB market. Now, where is value? I think that's something I'm still figuring out, because I think the market is already a little crazier than even I anticipated. I kind of was looking at the portal as an opportunity for Nebraska to go in and land a talented quarterback that they may not have to pay close to as much as Dylan Raiola. You could go into the portal and land a guy for 2.5 to 3 for a year. Where the market is right now, it might end up having to be something where Nebraska has to go in the portal and find someone that will cost them as much as they had allocated for Dylan in 2026. So that's just where the QB market is right now. It's pretty nuts. And I mean, just based on the numbers I've heard this week, we'll see if things settle down here, because I can still see the market correcting itself a little bit before Jan 2nd, just because there are so many teams in the QB market. There are so many teams that even can afford to pay as much as some of these top end quarterbacks are talking about. So, I could see the market correcting itself a little bit, but where is value? I think it's in the guys that don't have the on-field experience necessarily, but have played, like at a very, very, very good level when they've been on the field in a reserve situation, and they've gotten reps in practice against an elite defense. Guys like Kenny Minchie at Notre Dame. I think you're going to see Lincoln Kineholz at Ohio State probably enter the portal. Like, those I think are going to end up being good value, because I'm not sure how much teams are going to be willing to spend on guys with limited reps when there is a lot of tools and a lot to be confident on. And like, okay, hey, Kenny Minchie, 2.5 years at Notre Dame, practicing against Notre Dame's defense. How much, how would you compare that tape to Peyton Joseph at Old Dominion, competing against, competition he's playing at Old Dominion? Which one do you think is better prepared or better suited for the next level? Game practice reps aren't game reps necessarily, but when you're practicing against the top end of the sport, that stuff matters. And I think that's honestly where the value is going to be, because a lot of these teams can't rely on game tape or production and can't just throw money at the guy that threw the most yards in college football this year. Like, they have to go and like do their due diligence here. And I don't know how many teams are going to be willing to do that when in the speed dating kind of portal era.
Do you think Nebraska's sort of in a weirdly advantageous position for those types of guys because of the fact that TJ Lateef is already in that room and you're like, hey, we know we have some level of comfort with TJ Lateef if he ends up being the starter or whatever, so they can sort of take a chance on a guy that doesn't really have much film at this level?
That's, I think, like, again, I will say I don't know 100% if Nebraska is ultimately going to go the route of, because they could still absolutely choose, because they know the sense of urgency for 26 and the schedule, that, it really may make sense to really invest in that position and go get a game changer. But I don't think Nebraska necessarily needs that. They need someone that can play within Dana Holgerson's offense. And you can find that guy at, much cheaper than what you paid or were expecting to pay Dylan Raiola here in 2026. So, but that's a conversation that I think is still ongoing within the programs, trying to figure out kind of what makes sense. And again, how some of these dominoes elsewhere impact Nebraska. Like, again, like what Miami does at quarterback is going to have such a big impact elsewhere, because there are guys in the portal that have not entered the portal yet that if they do, they would be high on Miami's board. But Miami's already doing their due diligence on guys in the portal and already has an idea of who they would want next year. And so they're picking between this and whoever doesn't get picked there, whoever doesn't get picked at Oregon, whoever doesn't get picked at Indiana, someone else is going to end up with a pretty talented quarterback for potentially good value, because that guy was expecting this kind of payday from this school. And now he's left in the dark and is like, okay, well, I'm open. I'm available to, whoever wants me. And there'll be a program out there that can get that guy on good value.
So, Tim, let me ask you this, because there's, I look at the list and you've made it clear that there's going to be guys that are not currently announced that will end up in the portal. So we're working off of an incomplete list right now, right? But how many guys do you look at that aren't, like you mentioned, Sorsby appears to be off the market already. But how many guys actually are there going to be that you look at as, hey, that's a guy that Nebraska should pay 3.5 or whatever the number is, $1 million to, as opposed to, like, if that's the asking price for guys that are like a little bit further down the line, then like, where do you draw that line between this is where, like, these are the guys that are actually worth that to Nebraska for next year?
I think the line genuinely is at like Kenny Minchie for me.
Okay. Like,
yeah,
you'd pay Kenny Minchie like premium starter money.
No, I mean, as in like
right above him.
Above him.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, I think at least that's where, like, the last time I looked at, I mean, I'm not sure what rankings are looking at or like the assessment, but like I think at the top end, like Hoover, Mestamaker, I think Raiola, Levitt, well, not Raiola yet, Levitt, Sorsby,
I think Lagway.
Yeah. Say, is it Wow for TV Lagway showing up?
Yeah, Philo. I think those guys are in the, like,
where do you put Childs?
Childs, I'm curious on. Childs is one where, what do teams evaluate? How do teams evaluate this year at Michigan State? There's a lot of highs, some lows on tape. Or there's a lot of, like, there's highs and lows on tape. There's not a lot of consistency on tape. So where do teams view him? He's what I'm curious for Nebraska, because it definitely feels like Nebraska is at least monitoring that situation, but and he is a little further along than like Jeff Sims was as a passer. But like, I wonder if they've learned their lesson from Jeff Sims and are looking for more of a proven commodity that is a little more put together as a thrower of the football than, Childs is at this point, and even, the lessons they learned from Sims.
Do you think Childs could end up being like what you had said for Nebraska, that these other quarterbacks move in the market and then Childs becomes one of the better available? So maybe his payday actually ends up a little bit higher than what the initial evaluation is, just because of kind of where everything else transpires, whether it's Nebraska or elsewhere?
I think so. He's one of those guys I think is like right above the Kenny. Like, I think the in my head I have Minchie, and then like right above him is Childs, and that's only because we've seen the highs on tape and there is the legit starting experience across, years. So like, I think all of that together points to that guy's going to end up getting a bigger payday than probably most people anticipate, even people around like Michigan State.
So on that same note, and I just want to make sure that I'm hearing you clearly. So when it comes from Nebraska's side, is it more of just Nebraska wants to play this out, see how the field kind of evens out and then go after their quarterback, or are they specifically targeting transfer quarterbacks right now and hoping that they will beat out maybe other schools for services? Is it waiting for the field to open up, or are they already trying to see if they can land a quarterback before those dominoes start to fall?
I mean, I think as far as I know, it's been more of a like waiting game of just like evaluating the positions as it is. That said, I mean, there's already every program at this point that's in the QB market is back channeling with agents. So there is some of that getting worked together, at least trying to get visits lined up and trying to get just like, hey, are you interested? Presenting yourself and doing your part so you're ahead of the game come Jan 2nd. But I mean, I put it on the board earlier this week, and I still kind of believe it. It's not necessarily pointing to an individual guy. I just don't think Nebraska's transfer quarterback edition is in the portal currently.
Okay. Tim, is there and we'll get off of quarterbacks here in a second, but is there a guy, you mentioned Colton Joseph from Old Dominion. Is there a guy like that? I think everybody's sort of looking like, oh, who is there going to be another Trinidad Chambliss type? And you don't have to go like D2 deep dive on me here, but is there a guy, whether at like an FCS program or a group of 5 school, that you're looking at and you're like, yeah, I think this guy actually has a shot to be a really good power conference quarterback?
I'm interested in Craig at Harvard. Just what that looks like at the next level. I don't know if he's a fit for Nebraska necessarily, but I'm really curious to see where he ends up. Joseph's the one though. Like from the early talk, it sounds like that's a guy that ends up getting last year's kind of Mateer treatment of like this dynamic dual threat quarterback that's looking to make the jump up, and a bunch of teams are just really enamored with him, and with Mateer just ended up going to Oklahoma. But yeah, I think the market for Joseph is going to be really interesting. Just because that's the dual threat, like the young dual threat. I think some of these teams are going to take a chance on, but I'm waiting to see. I'm honestly, I want to see if there's I haven't done a whole D2 deep dive myself, so I think that's what I was hoping to do here before the portal opens and just see kind of what is out there. I think if you're looking at another, again, it's more of an established name. The guy's playing in the playoffs but I'm really curious what Alonzo Barnett does, and how that potentially impacts Dylan. Because I believe he has eligibility left. If I'm not mistaken.
Not 100% sure. I'm checking, see if I can figure it out.
Yeah, I was checking that as well.
I was having this trouble with Trinidad Chambliss earlier as well.
Redshirt junior, so he's got 1 year.
Yeah.
So he has 1 year. So I'm curious if he just follows Bob to UCLA, and if he does do that, what happens with Nico?
Yeah, sure.
So because Nico's one that I'm waiting on to see what happens there. I think there's another big frame quarterback on the East Coast I'm keeping an eye on to see what happens with him, because I do anticipate he enters the portal. Byron Brown, is he going to follow Alex Golesh straight up to Auburn, yeah, or is he going to do something else? At this point, I think he's just going to I think he's just going to follow to Auburn, but really curious to see what he ends up doing. So there's dominoes still to fall, and so we'll see. But the good news is we have an idea. I think Texas Tech is generally out of the market at this point because they have an idea who that guy's going to be. Indiana is pretty much having their pick of the litter, so they'll be out of the market very early. Oregon, similar situation, and honestly, I don't know how much battling Nebraska is going to end up doing with Oregon for a transfer QB, and then Miami's the one that I'm waiting on, because I think Miami's the one that is going to most impact Nebraska's kind of transfer QB search.
Is there any other players in the portal that non-quarterbacks that you're just excited about, that you're excited to see where they land, that you just think are really good players?
Let me pull up my portal list.
Is it an Excel sheet? You got a Word doc. How do you do this?
Right now it's just a Word doc, but I'm going to convert it to an Excel sheet here soon. I need to build it, really, really build it out.
Color code that thing? Is it green, red? What does it look like?
Not yet. Again, color coding happening. That's where right now I'm just kind of talking through these tiers. I need to really build this out and start highlighting and figuring out how I view these guys. So, no, a couple guys, I think the DB market's really fascinating. Jabril Rawls at Florida State was a bit of a surprising one for me. And the talk on Florida State's end is with what that program is going to be this year, it doesn't really make a whole lot of, they don't expect it to be really good. So it's it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to, pay up for a freshman cornerback when you don't really know how much longer he's going to be around. So that's a guy, or a young cornerback that you don't know how much longer he's going to be around. So Rawls is one that I've got an eye on here in the portal. Devin Tompkins at USC is another one I'm really excited about. Young guys I'm excited about. Chris Barnes is a fun one. I put him on X earlier this week. Just a little slot receiver who initially signed with Washington State, but then ultimately followed Jake Dicker to Wake Forest. Was a really good returner for them. Had a good year. Nebraska just made Lonnie Teasley official, by the way, so that is good news.
Yeah, it's always nice to officially announce your hires. That would be nice to get some news on them.
Well, especially when, you got offensive linemen being like, oh, yeah, we got Lonnie out here. And it's like, I don't know if you're supposed to say that, bud.
But one more name for me. I was a huge fan of Tyler Thompson coming out of high school. Edge rusher out of North Carolina, was a Michigan target at one point. Just like kind of the like edge type that like that program at the time was really having success with. And was really cool to see him have the year he had at North Carolina. I'm glad he's getting out of that situation. I'm glad he's kind of going on to greener pastures, and it sounds like he's got some good options out there. So I'm really excited to see what he does in a better system around better players.
Tim, are we getting any more assistant coach news this weekend?
Potentially. We will see. I'm tracking a few things. I mean, again, like I'm at the point where I'm dwindling confidence in Elijah Robinson, but I don't think it's ever over. You know what I mean? Like I still think like Rhule has that relationship, and I'm really curious to just where Elijah's head's at. I told the story on our previous show, but when I was covering A&M, I just kept bumping into him. Like every time I was out on the road, it was just like, Elijah's here. Oh, okay, cool. Like, and it was like, there was a day I was on the 7-on-7 circuit I was like making the rounds at high schools. And we just ended up hitting like 4 high schools together where like I was just like making my rounds, and like they weren't close to each other. We were up and down, like just going up and down 45. And like, it's just like, he beat me one place where it was a 20-minute drive, and I have no idea how he beat me there. Like he was just in the office talking to the coaching staff, and I walked in and he's like, hey, what took you so long? But like, he's a grinder, man. And like, I'm really curious where his head's at, because I think in his heart of hearts, he's at his best when he just gets to dive in, evaluate, and develop defensive linemen. And I think Nebraska's given him that opportunity. He's had that opportunity elsewhere, but I wonder if he wants an opportunity to really dive in and learn from, I think, some of the issues Syracuse defense had this year. It's really important, I think, for guys, position coaches in particular, or coaches in general, to like figure out their role. For Elijah Robinson, I think it was really important for him to get that experience as a DC, realized it may not be his best fit, and now figure out how to transition his career moving forward, whether that's, becoming just a career D-line guy, or, kind of adjusting here and figuring out, okay, can I go learn somewhere so I can become a better defensive coordinator down the line?
Tim, is there anything that Rhule would say today that maybe you're peeking in for, or you're interested to hear from, or maybe a peek behind the curtain in terms of what future plans could be like, even with everything you just said about portal quarterbacks and options for Nebraska? Is there anything that you're going to keep an ear open for from what the head coach has to say today?
Yeah, I'm just curious on his thoughts on, I think the rest of the offense, where, because I'm sure he's going to be asked on offensive retention, where he feels on that. Like, I'm curious to see where his thoughts are, because that is just an ongoing process. Like, that is something where, I mean, even with the Dillon stuff, like, it felt like things were obviously trending one direction, but you wouldn't really know for sure until, there was an announcement made. And I think there's a lot of that right now in the building, where there's some guys that, have some stuff they're entertaining outside, but they're seriously considering coming back. And there's just kind of like, you can't read into too much, in the sense that you can't be like, okay, well, this guy's for sure gone and this guy's for sure coming back. I think there's too much up in the air right now, but I'm really curious to see what Rhule's confidence is in that offense and the pieces they'll have in 2026.
Tim, I'll let you go on this one. Have you thought anything interesting, or have you thought that anything that's been interesting about the I guess the details of the Dillon and Nebraska split? I mean, as far as I know, I could be wrong. I don't know if I've missed it, but you haven't seen like the post from Dillon where it's like, thank you for my time in Nebraska. I want to thank all my coaches, whatever. It seems like that's, especially as a legacy player, sort of a weird omission. And then you get Coach Rhule earlier this week saying like, hey, if he feels like he needs a fresh start, we wish him the best. With that being said, a lot of good players want to come to Nebraska.
And then you had Damon in there too. Like it's layered.
Like, yeah, it's there. Like, has anything really stuck out to you in terms of how this has played out publicly?
Yeah, I think of a lot of what you said yesterday, and kind of reading between the lines here is pretty accurate, just in sense of like where we're like at on this situation. It's more of like, again, it just kind of felt this way for a while. Like this felt like more of like a mutual thing than like one side being like, all right, we're done, we're taking our ball and we're going home. Like there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot here. You look at it didn't come down to money necessarily, but money is always part of it. It didn't come down to you know, comfort necessarily. It didn't come down to Donovan Raiola. It didn't come down to Dayton decommitting. It didn't come down to any one thing, but like we combine everything all together. And just like, I think for both sides, it just made sense. And like, again, there's plenty, I mean, within the fan base, within the program, on the outside that believe for both sides, this is the best move. And I think for Nebraska, this gives them an offense, I think, opportunity, I think, for Dana Holgerson to really kind of dive in and build the offense in his vision, and figure out how he wants to continue building that up. I think adjusting your offense to the personnel you have. And I thought it was really interesting. I mean, Steve Marek asked Dana about it, about what he's seen from Jeep's offense and specifically offensive line and what they could use. And Dana like didn't really open up too much on that, just because it sounded like he just hasn't watched a whole lot of Georgia Tech yet. So, and that's something he noted he's going to do in January. When that does happen, I'm really curious if that changes Nebraska's portal strategy, because I mean, again, I think it's going to end up happening before that. But whenever Dana gets on the Georgia Tech like O-line tape, I think he's going to be really excited about building a QB run game to pair with what he's already kind of doing in the passing game. Because what Georgia Tech did this year, up front, to put Haynes King in ideal situations to open up that run game and to really get that offense going, is really fun, really creative, as far in the forefront of Power 4 football as we've seen in terms of building out QB run game. So I think there's a lot of excitement within that offensive staff in terms of getting this opportunity to build out a QB run game.
That's our guy, Tim Verghese, Inside Nebraska. Tim, great stuff as always. Enjoy your holiday, and we'll talk to you in a couple weeks.
Likewise, guys. Happy holidays.
Appreciate you, Tim.
Tim Verghese from Inside Nebraska. Good stuff there.